Well, as you may recall from my last session, we're talking about listening. And I shared with you that vulnerable listening is a way that you can open up deeper communication and greater connection. As you learn to listen rather than to react to whatever your spouse says, you'll begin to get a softer, more vulnerable, and less defended response coming back. That will help you begin to move into better conversations and more mature love. Well, I want to emphasize that it's important to use good listening, not only when things are getting heated, but through much of our day-to-day interactions. The better you become at listening, the more you're able to build trust and unity with your partner. So I want to start in this lesson by talking about some poor listening responses. And these are things that we do and say that seem to be okay, but are actually harmful. Frankly, most of us use a number of these responses, so my intent isn't to be critical, but bring them to your awareness. Here are the kinds of things we do that aren't helpful. One is ignoring, which is being distracted or simply not giving importance to what somebody has to say, not giving them your full attention. Two is formulating your own response, thinking about what you're going to say next, instead of giving your attention to their words, to understand their message and point of view. Number three is arguing, or immediately judging what your spouse is saying and then letting them know why they're wrong instead of hearing them out. Number four is one-upping. You hear what your spouse says, but you come back with something like, well, you think that's bad, here's what happened to me, or it reminds me of. Number five is lecturizing or moralizing, in which you're telling your spouse how they should think and feel. It's designed to get them to change their thinking or behavior, but it usually results in resentment. Number six, criticizing, which is finding fault or making negative comments about your spouse's behavior or character. Number seven, and this one is so common, giving advice. I like to call it nifty plans. And this one is big because we do it very frequently and we don't think of it as harmful. We actually think that it's a way to be helpful to somebody. But what we're doing is we're telling them what to do or how to solve their problems. And this is particularly important for men to understand. Remember, the number one complaint from women is that their husbands try to fix them and they want them instead to listen, not solve their problems for them. Yet men naturally go into a problem-solving mode. And of course, there really are times when advice is helpful and necessary, but it's usually further into a conversation once your spouse has been heard and is receptive to your input. Number eight is sympathizing, not to be confused with empathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for somebody. It might seem caring, but it reinforces a person's complaining or negative feelings, and it rewards them for feeling bad instead of taking action. Number nine, rescuing or soothing. Similar to sympathizing, this is trying to make somebody feel better rather than allowing them to own their experience. Rescuing can include making somebody feel better by trying to minimize or even undo the consequences of their actions. Well, all of these responses are pretty common, and all of them get in the way of good listening. They cause two main harms. Number one, they invalidate the feelings and experience of the speaker. And second, they make it unsafe for your spouse to open up, to talk. They cause communication to close down. So what do you do instead? Well, let me offer you a few guidelines as you learn to develop greater connection through listening. First is to be totally attentive and present. This means that you're not passive during listening, but you're actively working to tune in to the speaker. You demonstrate this by giving your complete attention, not only in crucial and high-stakes conversations, but even during more informal and casual conversations. A second guideline is to have an open and non-judgmental mindset. The biggest barrier to good listening is the tendency to judge or evaluate, whether it be positively or negatively, what somebody else is saying. It's the most natural thing in the world to agree or disagree. It could be something as simple as, let's say your partner says, "I hated that party tonight." Well, your brain is very naturally going to analyze the statement and cough up a response. "Yeah, me too," or "No, I thought it was great." Well, good listening is avoiding this tendency. Judging doesn't allow you to fully hear and understand what's being communicated because you're distorting the message with your own viewpoint or feelings. And it causes people to shut down rather than open up because they don't feel safe. A third guideline to good listening is to use prompts. And by prompts, I'm talking about facial expressions, really looking at somebody, looking them in the eyes, or it can be simple comments or phrases which let your spouse know that you're engaged and which encourage them to continue. It can be something as simple as, okay, wow, that didn't feel good. Tell me more. I see, and so on. These statements let your spouse know that you're paying attention. You want to hear what they have to say. A fourth guideline is to hear the meaning. And I talked about this in the last lesson. You're trying to grasp what may be deeper than just the words. You're trying to hear not only what is stated, but not openly stated. Hearing the meaning is something that's done with the heart as well as your mind. A fifth guideline is to ask clarifying questions, and these questions invite your spouse to clarify or elaborate on his or her opinion or inner experience to fill in missing data. Could you share more about what you mean by that, or what did you make of that, or what did you feel when that occurred? You have to be careful when you start asking some questions to not take over by asking too many questions. You don't want to become an inquisitor. But you do want to make sure that you understand, and so you ask questions to get more clarification. A sixth guideline is to restate what you're hearing. This might include a simple statement like, let me see if I understand, or is this what you're saying, or you feel. You don't want these statements to be long. You don't want them to interrupt the flow of your spouse. The purpose is every once in a while, though, to let your partner know that you're really listening and to make sure that you're tracking, that you're understanding what they're saying. And by the way, more important than the words that you use when you're rephrasing is communicating that you're doing your best to be attuned to their message. The final and seventh guideline is to be okay with silence. Most people are uncomfortable with silence, and so if things get quiet, they jump in and start talking. But if you can just be quiet and not over-responsive, then your spouse will pick up again. They'll keep going. And when they hear that you're not going to step in and interrupt them or fix them, they'll oftentimes go a little bit deeper than before. Well, you're not going to use all of these guidelines every time your spouse has something to say. Obviously, that would be overkill. But it is important that you show up and pay attention when your spouse speaks. By being present and listening, you're letting your partner know that you're accessible, attuned, and responsive. This builds connection. Listening isn't an end, but it's a means for getting to greater trust and unity. One final comment I want to make about listening, and this actually goes beyond listening. Once you've listened to your spouse, particularly if they've shared something troubling to them, a good next question might be, how can I support you? What can I do? And by the way, that's a better option than trying to guess what your partner needs, or trying to fix or solve a problem for them, or by giving them unwanted advice or solutions. It communicates respect and support without taking over. So let's move on. In the last few lessons, we've been talking about the skills of honesty or disclosing in a vulnerable way, the skill of empathy and listening. And we're now going to move into the next section, which is about resolving conflict. You'll find the skills that we've been talking about here are very much at the heart of resolving conflict. So let's move on.